Okay, it's still recording. Please mute your microphone and turn off your video. Please fill in the evaluation form during or after the session. And please remember to fill in your student number in the chat. And then this session is being recorded. I want to go back to the team meeting. We are waiting for the person who is busy presenting. I have had some people presented their work up till now. They gave it to me, and I thought this would be a good time to speak to you about the general mistakes I've seen up till now. I'm going to check on the chats whether you can hear me, because things were a bit... The recording has started. Can you hear me? Please indicate if you can hear me, and then just write your numbers in the chat so that we can see if you are there or not. These are a few things that I think you must, in general, sort out. It's the mistake I see with everyone. The first one is your headings. You usually in the 101 tutorial letter, they explain to you what they expect of you in the with headings. Now, if you look at the headings must actually be part of how you are going to present your argument. And that is quite important, because I've had to read one without headings and numbers, and honestly I couldn't follow the argument at all times. So you have to sort out the headings. Now, this is a case of if you can't do it, you teach it. But since I've done my master's, they've upgraded MS Word, and if you look at the ribbon on top, there is one called References, a tab called References. And with that, you can actually organize your headings, your table of contents, your references, plus your bibliography. I didn't write my thesis like that, and I can't teach you to cope with that. We are having a session with the library early in July. So it's quite important that you attend that lesson, because Richard, who's in our IT department, and the library will be present at that meeting. I think it's the first meeting in July. And in that meeting, we will be able to maybe teach you how to use that function. Because I also looked at a PhD proposal, and I could see how strict they are on having your headings and references, that must be correct. So it's very important. Just have a look at that, please. Then from the headings, the link between your introduction and your conclusion must also be clear. In your introduction, you choose the verb. You are going to say whether you are comparing, analyzing, describing, exploring, whatever you are going to do. That is part of your introduction. By comparing the salary of teachers to the salaries of politicians, if that's what you're going to do, then the link in the conclusion would be after having compared. And then you come to your conclusion that teachers should be paid far more than politicians. But I hope you see that how you write that. Then do you remember when we did the sorry, when we spoke about the plagiarism, there was a reference to pretend or faux paraphrasing. What I found across the board, and don't feel bad about it, it is part of the training. That's how I earn my money. If you don't make mistakes, I can't eat. What you need to remember is that if you use the words from the passage, it's not enough merely to put the reference there. You need, if you use the express words, the precise words from the passage, that must be in inverted commas. Because if it's not in inverted commas, you imply that you have used the idea, but you've presented it in your own words. And that will then be picked up as a form of plagiarism. So if you have any references, really go back in detail to sort that that out. I'm sorry, there's a message from head office that I need to answer quickly. Okay, so we were speaking about the faux plagiarism, and that can then become a serious problem. The other general mistake that I've picked up was especially where you focus on your literature review. Remember, I gave you a list of words. There's a file that I've uploaded for you, and it is known as the writing skills for postgraduate studies. Now, if you look at that file, there's a file where they speak about the reporting verbs, or I call them introductory verbs, where if you use the verb, it forces you to kind of interpret, and then you are less likely to commit plagiarism. It is the difference between he argued that or he speculated that. Do you see there is a difference in the rest of the sentence, and the whole meaning changes? And I want you to have a look at that as well, because currently, and it's across the board, those that I see, you have public management is defined as, then you have the definition, and then you have the reference at the back. And that becomes very boring because in that way, your sentences are all structured exactly the same, and that is causing a problem then. So that is why I really need you to start using those reporting verbs. Then what some of the other problems is that I can see some of you don't even put it through a spell checker, because some of you coin your own words. You have to put it at least through a spell checker before you give it to me. Are there any questions about the work that you have done up till now? Jacques de Tooy is going to join us in about 5 minutes to speak about his research. So are there any questions that you want to answer ask at the moment about the work we've done so far? You are very quiet. Are you all sitting somewhere near the fire and treating me as a radio? I'm sorry, I can't sing this time of day, so it's no good. How did it go with your feedback up till now? Did you understand the feedback? Where do I find the documents about the verbs, please? I will put it on the files again, because as we get better organized with the Teams classes, they moved the channels with which we work. So it would be a good idea. I must just have a look at the chat to see if they haven't maybe removed that. But it is actually very important that you look at it, because if you remember correctly, I told you there are certain phrases to use in certain times. I can show you the article because I can share with you. It was in May. File about postgraduate academic writing. Can you still see what I am? It's this task 3.5. Can you see here they have the reporting verbs? And that really makes a big difference to your writing if you can incorporate that.
Right, good afternoon, Mimi.
Good afternoon, Jacques, and welcome. Let me present you to the students, please.
Yes,
Is that fine with you?
My camera on, but I'm not the most beautiful person in the room, though. So I'm
No, but at the moment we
fine?
are very glad to hear about you. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to tell you a bit about Jacques. If he says, I must do something, I have to say immediately, yes, sir. I report to him. And on a personal level, he is the nicest person to work for. At the beginning of a semester, he tells you, will you organize such and such? And at the end of the semester, he tells you, thank you, you've worked hard. He's not a micromanager, and that suits me because I sometimes fly by the seat of my pants. So I think Jock and I work well together. At on an academic level, Jock first started at UWC, and one of his majors was Afrikaans Nederlands, which would be a combination of Afrikaans and Dutch. He worked with Wim van Zyl, who is one of the better known experts on Dutch literature and also Afrikaans literature. And then he later on did his master's at Stellenbosch, and he was one of those who went to a virtual graduation ceremony this year, which is very sorry because it is actually fun to get your degree. But yeah, you can tell us now about your research, and I'll watch the chat so that, and you must really ask him because he had all the problems that one can have with research. He had it. Okay, Jock, all over to you.
Right, thank you so much, Mimi. Yes, as Mimi indicated, I come from a language background. In 2006, I started the first writing center at UNISA, and that was at UNISA Paro. And my goal was to get more students to be interested in research and in academic writing. And I'm trying to share my screen here because I want to talk to you about all the problems that one can face when you foray into the field of research, because I had to wait for a research proposal to be okayed for almost 3 years. So all because of certain problems that I didn't even envisage or that I thought one can encounter. I'm sharing my screen here, but I don't see anything on the screen.
We can see this. We can see the screen, Jock.
Screen
Or
with my
I can see.
proposal, with my proposal on it.
Yes.
Right, so I just want to talk to you through some of the problems that I encountered with it. So I did my last master's on technology and language learning. That was part of modern foreign languages. And yes. So in the beginning, it was very difficult to come up with a topic because they give you the scope, but they don't give you the topic. And I think what is most difficult is the fact that you are uncertain about a lot of things. You don't know where to touch. You don't know where to start. You don't know how to condense things. You don't know how to start writing. And they usually ask you to start writing and to start the processes. So part of my research proposal was to really go and sit down and say, this is what I'm going to do. And the first question that I asked myself is, what is the problem that I wish to solve? And the problem solving part was a difficult one because you try to change the world with your research. And that was actually my biggest problem, because I knew that even amidst everything, I cannot change the world. So I decided I'm going to focus on a little bit of a little bit of a little bit, just to make it much more doable, because I realized that as soon as students start changing the world, they don't complete their studies. They don't complete their honors, they don't complete their masters, and they don't complete their PhDs. So I looked at an aspect of an aspect of an aspect. And after I started the writing center in 2006, I think there was around about 35 to 40 master students that graduated under me, because I started my very first master's I did in 2000. Now what I usually tell students is focus on one small problem at hand and try to solve it. In my case, it was first year students making the transition from high school into first year, and they can't write at university level, because the reality is, what a lot of lecturers don't understand is that academic language is not our first language. It's true what Mimi was saying about academic verbs, for example, to say instead of this person said, you can say this person indicated, this person stated, this person asserted, this person viewed, this person contrasted, this person distinguished, this person analyzed. And there's a lot of verbs that you can actually use that can make your argument so much stronger. But first you need to have a very good problem statement. Now the problem statement, I decided to, first of all, my supervisors told me they don't have a lot of time to read through my things. So I was asked to condense my research proposal of 20 pages up to just 5 to 6. And I decided to focus on open distance learning. I wrote an introduction to contextualize my research. I focus on a problem statement where I said, this is the problem. And what set it apart from other students, I think, was the fact that it's almost like you're entering a room and one person is dead in the room and they ask you what's the problem in the room, and you say there's a lot of questions that's going through your head. In this case, the questions that's going through your head is your research questions. But there is a bigger problem because someone in the room is not alive. That is the problem. And so it needs to be a statement and not a question. And a lot of times we would ask a lot of questions and make a lot of sub-questions and all of that, but just try to keep focus. And that is where Mimi and myself can come in, and we can go through your work and say, you know what, change your problem statement a little bit here to make it much more doable. Look at your research aims and objectives. Now, what I didn't know, for example, was you need to have a research aim first before you can have research objectives. I usually confuse the two to say, you know, your research aim, this is what your research intends to do. But what I didn't know was, based on your aim, your objectives flow. And your objectives always starts with the word to. So it's to explore, to understand, to determine, to identify, to contrast, to distinguish. And so your objectives would always start with the word to. In this case, I had my research question to say what the purpose of the study was. And the research question always ends with a question mark. And that is what I wanted to know, even though it sounds very, very simple or very simplistic. It's there's so many things going through your head at one particular moment that you forget that your statement and your questions and your aims and your objectives all need to flow. Now, part of my research aims was to develop a certain portal, to evaluate the portal, to understand the experiences of students, and it's okay to use the word understand. So that is what I did, and also my last objective was to come up with suitable recommendations. Then I went into the literature review, and again, people didn't tell me this, but you can read forever. What I tried to focus on was to read within the last 5 to 10 years, because that would give me a broader scope in terms of what is current and to understand what the problems in the last few years were. So I decided to touch on my literature review, and I bought myself this huge user to sketch in. And on each page, yes, Mimi?
Yeah. Can I interrupt you? Can you ask the students if they have any questions about the difference between the objective and the aim? Because I also find that once we start working with a research proposal, it's very difficult to make that fine distinction. So do you have, I think, let's make a break between every section that you are discussing. Okay. And then they can ask questions in that time.
Yeah. Okay. Is there any questions?
Have any questions about the research question and the aims at the moment?
Nalisa,
Okay,
do you have
Joel.
any questions? Nalisa?
They usually put the questions in the chat, and then
Okay,
I take a break and ask them, answer the
okay,
questions.
that's good. That's good.
Okay, it seems as if they understand everything up till now. You can go on.
Right. So based on the literature review, I think what a lot of people they try to read and read and read, but you know, sooner or later you need to stop yourself from reading, and you just need to put something on paper. There's a saying that writing is the highest form of literacy, and the 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 sooner you start by writing all of the ideas on a piece of paper, sometimes you would agree with something, sometimes you don't agree with something, sometimes it's overwhelming, especially a lot of reading, and sometimes you don't know where to start with your reading, and the best way to start is try to internalize what you are reading. Make two columns on your page to say this person is for and this person is against it, because at the end of the day you can still go through your notes again. So that was where I started with my literature, and I just downloaded a lot of articles, about 20 articles at first, and I started reading. I started reading and making notes and highlight certain things and look at what a lot of authors are agreeing on and what a lot of them are disagreeing on. So that was actually how I started my reading, because the most difficult part of your reading is that you can read in circles very, very quickly. And that is something that I think you need to be very, very cautious about. If you struggle with reading, you can always ask us to go through one reading with you and to highlight certain key points, because I think there's a huge leap that you take from undergraduate to honors and from honors into masters, because your honors project, your literature review will be around about 10 pages. In your masters is 20 to 30 pages. So you are more than welcome just to contact us if you got problem with your reading as well. And so the literature review, I focus on what is happening in practice and what is current, and what is not so current. And then I moved over onto the research methodology. So the research strategy was where I struggled the most with. What am I going to do? Am I going to do qualitative or am I going to do quantitative? I decided on to take on the qualitative because I like the people. I like people in interacting with people. So I decided to make it a descriptive exploratory study where I can get various people's views on a certain topic. Now, the reason why I didn't also take on quantitative is that you need to pay for a statistician. And that is very, very costly. And I thought to myself, you know what, I don't have the funds now to pay for a statistician. But also with the qualitative part, you can always use the steps of TESH or make use of Atlas TI to code your document to say how many people agreed on a certain things, how do people position themselves. Nelisa, are you able to hear? Can you all hear me, Mimi?
Yes, Jock, I can hear you.
Okay, thank you, Adele. Thank you. So part of that, the qualitative and the quantitative part was very tricky at one point, because you got so many. Let me just get to the page. of the research methodology because I decided to make use of two approaches. The first approach was design-based research. I decided to do that with multimodality. And then I decided to do a qualitative and make use of purposive sampling. So I decided with the qualitative that I'm going to only interview. You can take up to 5 to 9 people to interview as part of a master's study, but I decided to take a group of 30 people in order to get rich data or a rich connection between the information. So in the interview stage, I conducted interviews and then I reached a point of saturation. That was what Bowen indicated to say, if you make use of a naturalistic study, you can easily reach a point of saturation where everyone is going to give you the same responses ever so often. They would, for example, say, if you're going to ask them, what do you think about the session? They would say, I like it. And a lot of people would say, I like it or I don't like it. And so that was also where the point of saturation came in, and then you can stop your data because it will lead to data replication and redundancy. And then I focus on my instruments to say what I'm going to use. I'm going to make use of field notes. I'm going to make use of naive sketches. And then you need to research your methodologies very, very thoroughly, because they are going to ask you what was your inclusion criteria and what was your exclusion criteria. Why did you include certain people and why did you exclude, just to make sure that it's fair and that you don't hurt people in the process, or that you don't exclude or discriminate on people in the research process. So that was actually quite something for me to take note of, to say, you know what, even if I interview these people, I need to make it credible, dependable, authentic. I need to make it conformable and transferable, the data. And then the ethical considerations. Now, a lot of people studying towards honors degrees or master's degrees, and then they get marked down on the ethics. Now, what I've done was I've researched a little bit of the ethics, and I found that, you need to adhere to certain reports. For example, the Belmont report or the Singapore statement, to say that you're not going to hurt your participants or you're not going to talk down on your participants, and that they can withdraw at any time. So your ethical clearance documents need to stipulate how are you going to protect your research participants. Aside from that, you also need to brief them from the very, very beginning, from the onset, to say, you know what, you're going to be part of this research. Yes, here's the form, and you can withdraw it any time, not to keep them hostage. And yes, it hurts when people at the very final stage say, you know what, I don't want you to use my responses. But the participants, you need to brief them from the onset. You need to make copies of all the information sheets and the consent forms. You need to keep copies of those. And remember, no one can, until the very last stage, see your research based on the confidentiality agreement between you and your transcriber, or you and your coder, or you and your statistician. It's only you and your supervisor and someone internal to the university that can see it. But you can't say this person said this and that person said that, because you need to code it in order to be fair to your research situation. Aside from that, you also need to integrate a withdrawal clause to say, you know what, this is anonymous, this is voluntary, you know what, everything is confidential, but if you want to withdraw, you can. And all identifying information will be taken from out of the audio recorded information, and you are going to anonymize that. And then you also need to tell your research participants that electronic support will always be available for them, and that they can engage with you at the researcher at any point of time, and you need to keep your data up to a period of 5 years before destroying that. And that is what a lot of people don't know about a lot of the ethical considerations. And you also need to have a signed agreement, and they ask you in your research, they ask you to put your the signed document of your transcriber, of your statistician, of your coder. Everything needs to be attached to your ethical clearance document. So when you start your research, you already, what I tell students is, use these jiffy bags and say chapter 1, and then put everything in chapter 1 into that, or chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4, or part 1, part 2, part 3 for your honors. For example, if you do your research methodology module, put everything together, because at the end of the day, there's nothing more terrible than to look for a wonderful source that you've used that you can't find again. And I went through that, and a lot of people before me went through that, where they actually need to omit that quote because they can't find the data. Then your research time frame, they're going to ask you about the research time frame as well. When are you going to meet your participants? When are you going to start your chapter 1? When are you going to start your chapter 2? Now, when you read, and you read with your literature review in mind, and you have all the theories, once your literature review is completed and you've done your research, there's also a phase called literature control, where you actually add to your literature as well what you found, that and that is what I had to integrate at a later stage to say my literature is now completed. So give yourself more time with your literature review to say, for example, that it's ongoing, and with your chapter 3, chapter 4, and chapter 5. Give yourself more time with that. So that is my experiences based on it. And I would just urge students from the very beginning, be very conscientious, be very much conscious on the whole process, and file everything as you see it. Not only electronically, but print it if you can. Print it if you can, and keep it at a safe place, because somehow or later you are going to look for that. Someone asked a question on how did you decide to exclude people? It's if you deal with first year students, for example, I dealt with first year students at university and how to teach writing to first year students. There was a student in their third year that was doing a first year module, and they weren't first year students. So I decided to exclude them on the basis that they already studied at another university, an English course, for example, and they are in third year and they're not doing this specific module, but they made use of the program. So I decided to exclude them. There were also some students that you'll find that that I decided to target English second language or English additional language students. So I to also exclude the English first language students from this research study, because somehow they were okay with academic writing because they come from a school where English was their first language. So that was some of my exclusion criteria. Do you have any more questions or for me to answer? Mimi, I see your hand. Right, and this will ask, for your honors project, what would be an appropriate length for your research methodology part? I think for an honors degree study, it won't be that comprehensive as your literature review, because you are going to have a research strategy, then a research design, and a research methodology. So that would be around about 2 to 3 pages. But remember, whatever you say, you need to contextualize and internalize within your study. So that is what I would say. Right, and yeah,
There's another question,
Carlo.
Jock. Yeah.
Yes, Mimi, I just saw another question from Lava King, and that is, what will we do if we haven't received our supervisor? Is there anyone that you can consult? Um, yes, you can contact the head of department if you haven't been appointed to supervisor. But on the meantime, I would also say to you, what is the topic that you have in mind? Because that would also determine your departmental allocation of your supervisors. What is your view on that, Mimi, at UNISA?
We had a similar question on last Saturday, and that's when I phoned you and you gave me that email address,
That's right.
mand@unisa.ac. I'll put it into the reply here because I think it's a very useful um, to have, a very useful email to have.
Yes, and I know that the MND email address, they are very proactive, Mimi, and they today and yesterday they had sessions on literature reviews and not only literature reviews, but also your research approach. And that was actually quite helpful. And all of that materials, I think we're just going to put it on the group, and then they can also access all those materials that the lecturers or the professors gave in that session.
Jock, where do we hear about these sessions?
Mimi,
Because it,
I heard that some of the students received emails from at their My Life accounts. But remember, honor students won't necessarily receive it because they are only focusing on masters and doctoral students. But
okay.
we can make that available to the honor students because I think it's a very nice to have. It's a very nice to have, especially in a repository where you can fall back onto,
Yeah.
because there's very nice literature and quotes and resources that you can also ask the library to download for you or to give you links to it. What I found during my studies was that at one point you'd hit a wall in terms of you can't access or you need to pay for certain journal articles. And the library, they are very helpful even during this COVID time, where you can send an email to the Cape Town Library at ctnlib@unisa.ac.za. I'm going to put it in the chat, and then they can also give students links to the online articles so that they don't need to pay for that.
Jock, Andishma, and as another question about the platforms where the students can see past literature reviews or research methodology, there is a repository keeping previous research, isn't there? There is because I can remember with that workshop we ran in George, that was the lady in charge from head office also told us that there something, but now I can't remember the detail.
Yes. What I can do, Mimi, is I've got, I think all the students gave their student numbers here. So
Yeah.
all the information that's from today's session that I need to find out, I can find out from Sine and from
Okay.
Patrick Ngulube, and then I can just link them with the relevant resources or repository for them to access.
Yes. One of the things that Sine said at that other workshop is if you have your supervisor, the supervisor, if you're honest, must have at least a master's. And if you are doing your master's, it must be a PhD supervising you. And it would be a good idea to try and find that person's latest research. And that's why I think there must be a part of the library where they keep that, because I think that will give you a good idea of, in your discipline, what is expected of you.
That's right. That's right. I think what helped me, Mimi, with my studies was sometimes you're in a field that's new or a field that's evolving, and you are academically put into a situation where you need to be able to write, you need to be able to do research, you need to be able to critically think, you need to be able to contextualize the research into current operations. And it's important for students to read widely, but within their specific field. I'm not saying that they need to neglect the human sciences or the law sides if they study economics, for example. But what's important is that they need to be able to read enough in order to get a mark above 60 in order to go into masters or into doctorate, because there is a lot of elbow pushing and ankle kicking in order to get positions, especially in psychology, for example. I know that a lot of students are competing, and it's cum laude students competing for placements in clinical, for example. So they just need to try to be the very best. I think we can provide a lot of support to them, but they need to give us ample time in order to read through their documents, as always, and also to advise them.
I want to add that I saw in some newspaper today that on an international scale of universities, UNISA moved up 14 places in the grading system. Now, those of you who still went to school in the days where you had a different, where you can say he came first in his class and second and third, to move up 14 places means that UNISA is developing a research culture. And these discussion forums are part of nurturing a research culture. So you are one of those who can catch a wave, because now more and more energy is going to go into research. I
That's
don't.
true. That is true. And I think UNISA wants to become a very astute research university, like the UCTs and like the other universities with a lot of research output. And I think it's also for our students in order to be scholars as opposed to just students, So I think we can provide a lot of support for students, but they need to, for us to critically guide them. But they need to stay in contact with us in order to do that, yes.
But Jacques, this group is working extremely hard. There are people, I don't know what they look like, but I know the names by this time, some of the names, and they are really committed. If we plan something, they come to the party.
Well, it's very, very good to hear, Mimi, because I think that when I did my first master's, Mimi, I was 20 years old and I didn't know where to start. I didn't know where to start. And a lot of people, they guide you, but it's not guidance really. It is almost like confusing you even more. And I think a lot of people would sit in that dip where they just want to give up, or they just want to say, you know what, I had enough. I don't have the stresses. And I think that is the time that you actually need to push. to say, you know what, I can do this. A lot of people before me have done this. So let me just push forward and just do the best that I can. And I think that will really, really help them.
Jacques, I see here on your research methodology, you spoke about design-based research. What exactly is that?
With my thesis, I decided I'm going to develop a web portal. So my studies, it was very much interdisciplinary. Let me just try to open it up again. It was very much interdisciplinary, and I decided, let me just, yes, and so I decided to develop a web portal or web platform where students can get a lot of resources like we've got with the postgraduate students, a lot of resources. And I built a website because I did educational technologies as a postgraduate diploma. And I decided to build this website that hosts a lot of material for first year students and videos and notes in order not to be excessive, but just to be enough for them to teach them the very, very basics of academic writing. So I had to establish the requirements. I had to, let me just establish the requirements. I had to design activities. I had to prototype it, and I have to evaluate it basically. And that was what my, with the evaluation part, they asked me, have I spoken to the students as part of evaluating the usability and acceptability of the design? And I decided, and I actually said yes, because at that point it was crucial to get their feedback. And that is where I kind of did my evaluation on the design-based research on. So I designed it based on the needs. Yes.
Did that help you when we developed the OERs? Because I found that with the assignments I've seen up till now, more or less on every assignment, I referred them to the OER. So maybe it's, if you can just give them some information about the MOOC.
Yes. What we can do later on, Mimi, is also to introduce this, the honors and master students and the doctoral students that's in this session to the open educational resources and the massive open online course. And you know what, as an honor student and as a master student, you don't have a lot of time. So the OER is usually around about 2 hours long, or the MOOC is around about 5 hours at most, because I think it's important for us to balance the extra time that you've got to take in, but also to explore and to they would say to internalize a little bit more. So I would say to the postgraduate students, let us work with you so that you can, because I know part of the struggles with a postgraduate is to get your document in order, to get your spacings in order, to get your page numbering, for it not to start on page 1, to start on page 5. Page 5 of page 6 is actually on page 1. So part of the MOOC will be to tell students how to let the document flow, and what are the skills that's actually needed at postgraduate level. Also, what students need to know is that when they start to quote, and the quote is longer than 20 to 30 words long, they need to indent. It becomes a little short paragraph, and there's actually a way of doing indentation. So they would also need to be able to indent if it's a longerish paragraph. So that is what I would say to students. And what I also didn't know, Mimi, and this is very interesting, when it got to the editing part of my document, where I needed to find editors, right? It was, I didn't know you need to pay for editors twice.
Oh,
Yes, you pay it before you submit your document, your final document to your lecturer. And after feedback, after you did the corrections, you need to send it to the editors again. So that is part of the things that I learned as I completed this master's degree. So I didn't know that, and that is the most important lesson that I learned from my master's, to have enough money to pay for an editor. But okay, that is over and done with, and I've got my qualification, and I'm happy about that.
Jock, what would be a reasonable budget for an editor?
Some editors, they would charge, Mimi, they would charge, let's say, 75 rand for every 100 words. Some editors would charge per page. Some editors would pay, would charge around about 3,000 rand. But it's also important to get a good editor, because you get a lot of people that would say that they are good, and then they would just say, you know what, together with this, I know that an editor asked my friend 12,000 rand and it wasn't even properly edited. My editor, I've paid around about 6,000 rand, Mimi, and it was the proofreading of it as well, to see that the ideas flow, because sometimes you mention something on page 7 and you didn't elaborate it on page 34. And so I charge for this whole comprehensive service, rather, in order to just submit.
And that is not sponsored by UNISA.
That's not sponsored by UNISA for university students, unfortunately. But I think if students can attend a session, for example, how to edit your own work, we can, for example, arrange a session like that, where we look through where we can get editors as guest presenters, Mimi. Then they can also show students some of the things that they can be looking for.
Yes, I have a contact. She's done international editing, so I'll find out from her whether she's available, and then we can have a session as well.
Yeah, and statisticians are very, sorry, they are very expensive as well. Some people pay up to 30,000 rand to get their stats, coded. And so that was very, very pricey to my liking.
Yes. Next time, Lizzie Lizzie would have spoken to you today. I don't know whether you saw in the chat line, but life happened to her. So Jock came to the rescue. He rides a white horse tonight, and Lizzie works with the statistics. So next time she will speak to us about her research and then the role of statistics in research in our next discussion forum, which will be the first Thursday of July.
Yeah,
Here is another.
Yes, but students are most welcome to contact us as well, Mimi, because I think we are very accessible in terms of helping them with their needs. Yeah, especially with the academic writing. Yeah.
Yes. Now, the academic writing, I think we can help with, but I can remember the communication, the communication students, they needed a specific kind of help with questionnaires. And that I knew. I referred the student to Lizzie, and she was helped by Lizzie. Do you see Andiswa's question here in the chat line?
I think that I responded to Andiswa class by saying the appropriate length or methodology.
No, it's a new one. Maybe you will I read it to you?
Please, because I don't think it refreshes, Mimi.
Okay, there are honor students who didn't receive their study material on time, and Van Schaik said that the textbooks were supposed to be given by UNISA. Is there any other way in which students could alleviate this issue, as lecturers have not responded to emails?
Maybe I think I can take it up tomorrow with the head of department, because it's very, for honors degree, a lot of them do it over 1 year. And I think that I can liaise with the head of department and just ask them what can be done in a situation like this.
Do you know what course Andiswa is doing?
Antiswa, I've got the student number, Mimi, so I can look
Oh,
up
you
what the
have
student
it.
system.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, then that will be sorted. Um, I Are there any other questions? Because as you can hear, we have all the clever people here today. And Jacques, I learned a lot about research tonight.
Yeah, I think research, sometimes as I grew up, and I started university at 17, and when I look at university back then through the perspective of a 17-year-old, I always thought research to be elitist. You need to be super clever, and you need to be very rich, and you need to be this and you need to be that in order to do research. But actually research is part of us. It's making our lives better as we work, or as we are as humans. And I think that um, yes, it's not that hard, it's not that difficult, to say the least, but we are there to guide them, and we are there to assist them, and we are there to read through the things, and to just to advise them a little bit more.
Yes. Andiswa and the rest of you, I just want to say something that Sine said at the workshop we ran in George about a year or two ago. She advised the students to only communicate with their university by using their My Life accounts. Now, if you are here, I assume you use your My Life account, but apparently some of the lecturers put a kind of firewall on their computers to prevent any other mail from coming to their work laptop or computer, because they have picked up viruses. And if you write from a Gmail account for one, it may not even reach the lecturer you are writing to. So it's quite important that you remember, when you communicate with the university and you communicate with us, please do it from your My Life account. Jacques, now I have the pleasure of thanking you. As I was sitting here and you were speaking to the students, and I heard the concern for the students in your voice, and with it a kind of warm affection for the students, I thought, what a pity you are sitting behind a laptop most of the time. You should be in class and be speaking to the students. It was
Maybe,
honestly
but
an
I
honor
can
to
I
listen
can
to you.
assist them regardless. I can really assist them. I know that you are very good in assisting them as well, and I think that this is just part of those things that we do. As South Africans, we tend to Ubuntu-nize the world, and to say that we are there for the students, but we really are. This is a service that students, they don't need to pay for. It's a free service to all UNISA students. Mix with us, talk to us, let us advise you on what to do, what not to do. And we are not inaccessible people or entities to approach. And I think that that can really assist you and guide you a little bit more. Yes, and but I really need to take it up with the communications department. I'm going to look at Ndiswa's inquiry, and I will write to the head of department either tonight or tomorrow morning.
Okay, thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, so we've had our first discussion forum. Thank you very much for coming. And then next month, I'll try and keep it to the first Thursday of every month so that we can have a discussion like this. And do you see, we went from what is a designed, what was the word, the designed based research to I don't have a book. All questions are so important. I had the philosopher for a math student, or for a maths teacher. I can't remember anything of the maths anymore, but she used to say, there are no stupid questions. So I really think that it is a good idea that we're doing this, and we are going to be the first wave of excellent researchers. When you win the Nobel Prize, Jock and I want to be invited.
And I want to see those cum laudes, Mimi. There's nothing as good as to get a cum laude, and I think that they will feel that as well.
Yes. So, ladies and gentlemen, if you have any more questions, you can contact you, and you are more than welcome to contact us if you need any kind of help. If it's the kind of problem that you feel you don't want to sit down, it's many things that you have to discuss. I have had team meetings with people, and it works as well as a face-to-face meeting. So we can always make a one-to-one meeting as well on Teams. But thank you very much. Go and have your dinner and keep warm, and please stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you,
Have a good
everyone.
evening. Have a good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mimi and Jock.
Thank you, Adele.